Hello, welcome. Good afternoon. I'm sounding a little weird. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, wherever you're locked in, wherever you're coming in from. I want to say special good afternoon to you guys. Welcome to Jael Joseph Live. I promise you guys I'll be back. Kako tea was hot last week, and we're just continuing with the heat this week. And I just want to welcome every single one of you who are on the live this afternoon. Make sure you do what you do best, which is share the live, share the live, drop your flag and share the live. Let me know where you're logged in from, where you're tuned in from. Appreciate that. So thank you very much again, guys, for coming in. You're in the door. Gerald's in the door. Gerald's like, I am in the door. We're getting ready for a show here this afternoon, this evening, and it is a Q&A show. So I'm not gonna be the one grilling anybody down because I too want to learn. I'm sure most of you who are coming on here this evening, you actually want to learn. You probably made a decision already. You probably confused about something. Tonight we're talking about vaccines and should I get vaccinated? Like should you get vaccinated and why should you get vaccinated if you want to get vaccinated and all of the different things and all of the different questions that we have about vaccines. One thing I've found a lot in the media is a lot of individuals, they push one single agenda. And when I say one single agenda, like it's almost like they're preaching to you about the information and you're just supposed to say, yes, it's the gospel truth. I'm healed. I'm going to take it in, right? Without being objective, without looking at all the different angles, the different sides of things. We were thrust into this pandemic. I almost said panoramic, which is my favorite thing to call it, about almost 2 years ago. Like it's slowly creeping up to the 2 year mark, and our lives were changed completely. I remember when the pandemic started back in March of 2020, and I would come on here and do my Kakuti live shows, and we were talking to people all over the world who were just literally just getting into lockdown and all of these different things. And I was able to be a source of information. And I guess that's why a lot of folks have been gravitating towards me and people have been sending me DMs, people have been meeting me on the streets, people have been sending me private messages, people like some of my friends, some I don't know, really asking, questions about vaccines and my opinion of vaccines and what I think about the vaccines and whether or not I am taking the vaccine or whether or not I've taken the vaccine. And everybody has all of these ideas and all of this confusion. And then I watch, a lot of world leaders, some have been mandating it and some have been saying, we're gonna go play as we go or decide at some point whether or not it's something that needs to be mandated. Lots of questions. Tonight is your night to ask questions. I have the 767-315-5235 number that I asked you guys to text. And let me tell you, the text messages, I normally don't use print paper, but I had to print. Like the questions came in. The questions definitely came in. You still have an opportunity tonight to ask questions. I'm hoping that in the next hour we can get as much of your questions answered. And it's something that has been on my mind for some time. And I figured, you know what? Let me see how I can do this best without coming across as being biased or without sticking to one side, but trying to be as objective as possible. I reached out to my sister, as most of you guys know. Those of you who follow me, my sister's a scientist, Jael. She's on the door. She says, I'm here at the door, right? She is right here, and she has been trying to school me over the last couple of months about vaccines. Of course, it's not her area of expertise, which she explained to me from the offset. However, her work allows her to work with proteins that are used in vaccines. And she said to me, who would be the perfect person to speak to? Asha, Dr. Asha Williams. And she connected me with Dr. Asha Williams. And I felt it was very important for me, not just as a woman, but as a Black woman, to have another Black woman in that esteem. speak to me and to speak to you about vaccines. And for those of you who didn't read the bio above, you can go back and you can check out the bio above, because I've kind of highlighted some of her bio in the description box above. But I also want to kind of, things that I didn't include in there is her background in terms of her education. So she earned a bachelor's in chemical and biomolecular engineering at New York University. Then she worked as a NASA bioengineering research intern before pursuing her PhD in chemical engineering at, I hope I said that right, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. She was awarded the RPI's Presidential Graduate Research Fellowship. And during her graduate career, she mentored several students. She presented at research conferences and has published 12 co-authored papers in peer-reviewed journals with a pending patent. So she ain't come to play. She is also she served as vice president of RPI's Black Graduate Students Association. She worked on initiatives to increase the recruitment and retention of minoritized students in graduate education, and was named an RPI Class of 2020 Changemaker. Guess what, folks? Dr. Williams is listed as one of 1,000 inspiring Black scientists in America in 2020 in the MIT Rising Star in Chemical Engineering. She's a scientist, and she is an island girl. She's a Black island girl. She's from Trinidad and Tobago. And I know it's not a happy kind of conversation, but I just want to welcome for the first time to the show, I want to say special good day to Dr. Asha Williams. Hi, Dr. Williams.
Hi, Jael. Thank you so much for the intro and for inviting me on your show.
Thank you
Happy
very
to
much.
be here.
Thank you very, very much for taking time. I know now is the time that's probably the busiest time of your life, possibly. And I am so grateful that you could take the time out to come and speak to us here on something that I guess a lot of people are worried about, concerned about, not sure about, and they have lots of questions. And
Yeah,
I
for
know
sure.
we're just gonna take a deep dive and start rolling with the questions because we have so many to go through. So I want to start with the main question that a lot of people that recurred in a lot of the questions that people were asking. People want to know, what are the main components of the vaccine? So what exactly is in the COVID-19 vaccines? And someone is saying, I've heard so many rumors and I don't know what to believe.
Yeah, so the main ingredient in the mRNA vaccines, as well as the J&J and AstraZeneca vaccines, which are viral vector vaccines, is genetic material that codes for the spike protein. And the spike protein is simply the protein that's found on the surface of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And that's the protein used by the virus to enter human cells and infect you. So for the mRNA vaccines, the main ingredient is mRNA, which essentially you can think of it as a instruction manual for your cells to produce that spike protein. And mRNA is something that is found in our bodies naturally. It's not, a foreign material that our bodies are going to react badly to. And then for the AstraZeneca and J&J vaccine, they also provide that genetic material in the vaccine. Now, the other ingredients are things like fats or lipids. In the mRNA vaccines, you have something called polyethylene glycol or PEG, and you can find it in other products like pharmaceuticals, food products. So if you're allergic to PEG, you should know because it's something that's fairly commonly used. And other than that, you have salts and sugars, and these are essentially to maintain the pH of the mixture to keep the vaccine stable and also to ensure that the pH of the mixture is similar to the pH of our bodies. So when you get the vaccine, you're not going to feel a sharp burning pain or anything. It's going to be comfortable for you to receive the injections. So generally, those are the ingredients. You have active ingredients, and then you have salts, sugars. For the J&J and AstraZeneca vaccines, they have preservatives, which essentially prevent the vaccine from going bad. They also have stabilizers like sucrose, surfactants or emulsifiers, which are used to keep the vaccine stable during transportation and storage. So because those vaccines are stored at higher temperatures, they have these additional ingredients to sort of stabilize and keep the vaccine viable over long storage periods, whereas the mRNA vaccines, because mRNA is such a fragile molecule, they require much lower temperatures for storage.
Okay, that leads me to the next question. Why is a viral vector fabrication being called a vaccine? The question goes on to say it is not that the spike proteins which the body would produce if you had naturally fought the COVID virus are being cultivated and inserted into the body. It's like, is that what exactly it means? Or it's
No,
fabricated?
no. The viral vector vaccines are essentially weakened forms of something called an adenovirus. And this is just the name of a group of viruses that cause different sicknesses like bronchitis, common cold, etc. So it's a very common virus that people are exposed to throughout their lives. But essentially what companies do with the adenovirus platform is that they remove all of the aspects of it that make it dangerous, all of the machinery and genetic material that would cause it to infect cells or make you sick. So they just use the shell of the vaccine of the virus. You can think of it as a car where you remove the engine and all the parts. So you just kind of have the chassis. So they use that to transport genetic material that codes for that spike protein. So in the question that you asked, yes, it's correct. All the vaccines target that spike protein, but it's not actually delivering spike protein. It's delivering instructions for your body to make the spike protein. There is the Novavax vaccine. They actually do produce the spike protein in the lab and purify it and package it to deliver to cells, but not for the mRNA or the viral vector vaccine. You're just getting the instructions and your body naturally reads those instructions and produces that spike protein to generate an immune response.
Okay, what is the difference between someone with a vaccine and someone without in terms of being contagious?
Okay, so this is something that I've heard a lot of people talking about recently, ever since the Delta variant popped up. This argument that, if you have, even if you're vaccinated, you can still get infected, you can still be contagious and infect other people around you. Yes, that is true because a vaccine is not, 100% effective. It's not a black and white thing where if you get the vaccine, you're 100% protected, especially with the emergence of variants. But what the vaccine does is give your immune system sort of a head start in preparing for an infection. So without the vaccine, you have the virus entering your body, your immune system kind of has to recognize that this is a foreign invader and ramp up its response over a couple of days in order to protect you. However, if you have a vaccine, your body already had a preview of what that spike protein looks like, what the virus looks like. It knows it's sort of on the lookout. You have these policemen patrolling in your body on the lookout for if this antigen ever appears. So if you get infected, you're able to mount an immune response much more quickly, and you prevent the virus from being able to make too many copies of itself or circulate in your body for too long to cause too much damage, leading to severe disease. Now, what has happened is that there is this new variant, the Delta variant, which it has a much, much higher viral load than the original virus. I think it's 1,000 times higher viral load. So what happens is that people who are vaccinated, because this variant is is just dumping way more virus into your system, you may not have enough antibodies to get rid of everything, and so you end up having these breakthrough infections. But the vaccines are still effective at preventing severe illness or preventing that infection from progressing to something that could be more debilitating. So the main takeaway, though, that I want to say is that if you're vaccinated and you do get a breakthrough infection, the benefit of the vaccine is that, one, the virus is not able to make as many copies of itself in your system as it would if you were not vaccinated. And two, you're able to clear the virus much, much more quickly than if you aren't vaccinated. So the period of time that you're actually contagious and able to infect other people is much shorter if you're vaccinated versus if you're not vaccinated. And then the overall benefit of the vaccine, again, is to prevent severe illness and death from COVID-19 and avoid overwhelming the healthcare system.
There are two follow-up questions that would probably come based on your
Mm-hmm.
is that what caused the Delta variant?
Yeah, so the way that viruses work is that they essentially hijack your cells, the cells of a host. So we're talking about humans. So human hosts, they enter your body, they hijack your cells, and they cause your cells to start making more copies of the virus. So instead of your cells making more copies of cells, they make more copies of virus. And the goal of a virus is to make as much copies of itself as possible, so to infect as many hosts as possible. There are some viruses where you know, you can get really sick or die very quickly after infection. But SARS-CoV-2 is, I would call it a smart virus because it essentially has a very long incubation period, which is the time between when you're first infected to when you first start showing symptoms. So you have a period of time where you're infectious, but you don't know, and you're able to infect other people around you. And so that allows the virus to just spread really quickly, make a lot of copies of itself. So if you're making a lot of copies of something over and over, eventually you have like mistakes occurring. If you're copying the same sentence over and over, you might make a mistake or have to rewrite something. That's essentially what happens with these viruses as well. When they infect a lot of people and they're allowed to run through a population undisturbed, you have mistakes happening in the genetic code leading to mutants. And so the Delta variant popped up because the virus, I think it was in India, the virus was allowed to spread uncontained because of low vaccination numbers there. So the ideal scenario for a variant to develop is having a large number of hosts available and then having these hosts not be vaccinated. So the virus is free to make as many copies of itself as possible in a person versus if you have a vaccinated population, yes, you can get infected, but you're less likely to have variants developing because the virus is not able to make as many copies of itself. So that's essentially how these variants pop up. The more the virus spreads, the more you have spread within an unvaccinated population, the more likely you are to have these variants occurring.
And the other question is, some might say I've gotten the virus, so I don't have to take the vaccine because I have natural immunity. What do you have to say?
Yeah, so natural infection, essentially, if you have COVID-19, if you get infected naturally, there's no way, we don't really have a good way of measuring how much virus you were exposed to, what was your viral load, what type of immune response you specifically mounted to your infection. So initially, there was this idea that, well, if you had COVID, then you have antibodies, so you should be immune. That's how it works with a lot of diseases, but not with COVID-19, because they've actually found that 10 to 15% of people who are infected with COVID-19, they actually don't develop any type of antibody response, or some people develop really short-lived antibody responses that kind of fade away after a couple of weeks. So the point of the vaccine is to provide your immune system with a standardized dose of the antigen so that you're guaranteed to mount an immune response. Whereas with natural infection, there's a chance that you might not have immunity even though you were previously infected. So that's kind of why you should still get vaccinated even if you were previously infected. And we also see cases of people who had COVID-19 previously getting reinfected. So that's kind of also pointing to the fact that prior infection doesn't provide full immunity. The other thing is that vaccination, the immunity that you get from vaccination provides greater protection against the variants compared to natural infection. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Even if you did mount a good immune response to your natural infection, you might not have as good protection against variants as you would if you got the vaccine.
Why
So those are
why is that? Why is that that if you
yeah. So if you have a natural infection, remember your body is seeing this foreign entity for the first time. It's kind of scrambling, gathering its resources to fight that off. Um, and so you have sort of a division of labor. You have some parts of your immune system generating antibodies and B cells to kind of destroy the cells that are infected in your body, get rid of the virus that's circulating in your system. And then on the other hand, you have your T cells that are storing a memory of this circulating pathogen so that if you get infected in the future, you have a memory that's stored. So if you have a really low viral load, maybe you will have that initial antibody response that will really quickly get rid of whatever virus is in your system, but not enough to produce that sustained T cell memory response or enough of those T cells to protect you from a future infection. Whereas when you get a vaccine, because it's just introducing you to one part of the SARS-CoV-2 virus is made up of 29 proteins, but the vaccine that you're getting is just focusing on one protein, the spike protein. And so you have all of your body's energy focused on destroying the spike protein and also storing a memory of it to prevent future, to protect you against future infection. Um, and so you have a more targeted, coordinated response versus when you have a natural infection, it's sort of a division of labor, and you don't have as robust of an immune response, or the memory cells don't have such a robust response. So when it comes to variants, because most of the variants, or all of the variants of concern actually, are the ones that have mutations on the spike protein, which is why, you know, if it's like you put up a poster for somebody that's most wanted, so everybody's on the lookout for this person, but then that person gets a haircut or something. So if you're looking closely, you can still identify them, but it's not as easy to identify them. And so the vaccine still provides protection against variants, but you may have more breakthrough infections with a variant because the vaccine was designed based on the spike protein of the original form of the virus. Not to say that with the variants you have no protection, the vaccine still provides you with pretty decent protection. I think in the future, they were discussing possibly designing vaccines that targeted specific variants, but we're also seeing that the current vaccines that we have do provide pretty good protection against variants.
and speaking of the vaccine and the protection and
Mm-hmm.
all of it, there is, people always discussing why the vaccines got released so quickly, because somebody's saying if vaccines take years to study, test, and approve, why is this, and they call it an experiment, approved so quickly? Why was it approved so quickly? What is it about the chemical makeup that makes it pass the normal testing phase of other historical vaccines?
Yeah, I think because of the speed of development, there's this misconception that a lot of safety steps were skipped or regulatory steps were skipped, or, this vaccine was just given a pass to come through. But that's actually not the case. I think the speed of development of this vaccine is due to many factors. So the first is probably, I would say, the work that was done before the pandemic even happened. So we've dealt with coronaviruses before. Coronaviruses are a family of viruses. Viruses come in families, just like we do. So we've had SARS, we've had MERS earlier, I think 2011 or 2002. Those viruses were also coronaviruses, but they weren't as efficient as SARS-CoV-2 in terms of transmitting from host to host and having sustained spread throughout the population. So those were sort of more localized outbreaks of infection. But at that time, there were scientists who were focusing on those specific viruses, learning about them, learning how they work, learning how to develop vaccines against them and what specific protein to target. So that's how they knew that the spike protein is the ideal protein to target in a vaccine against this particular family of viruses. So all of the preclinical work. So with vaccine development, you have preclinical work, and then you have your clinical trials where you actually inject the product in humans to test. So before the pandemic even happened, all of that preclinical work had already been done. Years and years of research were already done dedicated to this specific family of viruses. And then when it comes to mRNA technology, because I know that's sort of a new thing for a lot of people, yes, Pfizer and Moderna's mRNA vaccine are the first mRNA vaccines to go through all of the phases of clinical trial and be completely approved for use. But mRNA vaccine technology has been around for decades. It's been used to treat other diseases like cancer and rabies since at least 2011 or 2003, actually. When they first started testing it in humans. So mRNA technology has been around, maybe not on such a wide scale of use, but it has been used in humans before. It's something that researchers have been working on for a long time. The other thing that contributes to vaccine approval and testing being sort of slow is recruiting volunteers. So just because of public interest, these trials for COVID-19 vaccines were able to enroll participants much faster than normal. So I think for Pfizer, Pfizer's trial had about 43,000 volunteers in about 100 weeks. Whereas if you remember the rabies, I don't know, maybe as many people don't really know about the rabies mRNA vaccine trial, which happened in 2013. Pfizer took 16 weeks to recruit volunteers for their trial, 43,000 volunteers, whereas the rabies mRNA vaccine in 2013, they took 116 weeks to recruit 100 volunteers. So you can see that's like a 2-year difference, just because of public interest and the fact that the virus was running so rampant. So you had a lot of people who were exposed to the virus and were eligible to participate in clinical trials. So that in itself saved a lot of time. And then when you're measuring a vaccine's efficacy, essentially, like I said, with the virus running so rampant in the population, to determine a vaccine's efficacy, you just need enough people in your trial to get infected naturally. So this virus was already infecting hundreds of thousands of people daily. So they were able to get those initial efficacy numbers in just over 100 days. So that's much faster than something that's slow spreading like HPV, which is sexually transmitted. That will take a much longer period of time to get enough data from people getting naturally infected. And then when it comes to just getting approval from the FDA, I think, or I know the FDA definitely prioritized COVID-19 vaccines. So once these companies had their trial data packets together and presented it to the FDA essentially just moved them to the front of the line, and other drugs or other things that were waiting for approval got pushed back. So typically FDA review takes about 10 months, but they were able to authorize and review these vaccines in just 3 weeks. And that's literally just because they skipped them ahead of the line, ahead of a bunch of other people who had submitted their data packets earlier. So that's another almost 300 days saved. And then the biggest factor, or one of the biggest factors, I think, is just money. Like, people were throwing a ton of money at this vaccine. Governments, companies, universities, and we can see that the impact of the pandemic had a massive economic effect on economies around the world, just because they weren't able to conduct business. People were in lockdown. Industries were losing billions of dollars a day. So this is something that a lot of people had a vested interest in investing money in. What happened is that generally with companies, when they make a product, it goes through all the clinical trials, they submit the data to the FDA, they wait for the results, and once that gets approved, then they start manufacturing and scaling up and figuring out how they're going to mass produce their product. But what happened for COVID-19 vaccines is that because they had such a large amount of financial support from the government and other people, they were able to mass produce these vaccine doses during clinical trials, hoping they would work. So they didn't even know if they were going to work. But that's a risk that the government was willing to take. Like I said, this is sort of unprecedented, the amount of money that they invested in this. And I know there are people out there who would say, well, they invested all this money, so they made sure that it worked out. Well, that's not the case. There are companies like Merck who also developed COVID-19 vaccines and they failed. So they kind of just lost that money that they put into mass producing ahead of time. So it's not, the vaccines that were actually approved are the best of the best, essentially, because they got through that stringent approval and regulatory process. So I hope people understand that speed of development doesn't mean that ethics or safety around the vaccine development process were compromised in any way. It's just a lot of factors. The typical factors that influence the speed of vaccine development are the money, the approval timelines, just waiting in line, and wait times. Those things were cut out. So they just focused on the science, and optimizing processes, carrying out clinical trials, getting data reviewed, and then mass producing to get it out to the population as quickly as possible. So nothing was skipped. No shortcuts were taken.
Thank you very much for that explanation, Dr. Williams. Once herd immunity is achieved, which is like, I guess, 70 to 80% of each country's population, can we go back to normal?
I think, I don't know if we would ever get back to what we know as normal. I think this might end up being something that we just have to kind of live with. It's going to be something that's not as, hopefully, if we get enough people vaccinated where the virus doesn't mutate into something worse, hopefully it can become something that does not pose as big of a threat. It's not able to cause these massive outbreaks in areas. But I think globally, we still have a very individualistic approach in many countries, and there are still vaccine shortages, which are contributing to the global problem. So the risk of the virus kind of remains for everyone as long as there's any nation that's experiencing massive outbreaks, because as you can see, the virus doesn't respect borders. If there's an outbreak on the other side of the globe, eventually it's going to get to us and affect everyone globally. So I think it's kind of wait and see. I really can't predict what's going to happen with the virus, especially when human behavior is also turning out to be so unpredictable as well.
And I want to flip the question around a bit. What can happen when not vaccinate? So if people decide, because there are people who have their views and their ideas, and be it religious, be it and I'll go in a little bit to talk about probably the underlying issues. So we'll not get to that as yet. But what can happen if people decide? So let's say a country like Dominica, where people are more are less reluctant to vaccinate. What is the closest thing to the possibility that can happen in that case?
So this is actually something that I worry about with Trinidad and Tobago, which is where I'm from, because there's a lot of vaccine hesitancy there as well. So the worst case scenario is people refuse to get vaccinated and they just allow the virus to run through the population. And you just have very high rates of infection. So that's something that's going to overwhelm the healthcare system. It's going to prevent people who need non-COVID related medical attention from getting the care that they need. So it's going to have this sort of ripple effect throughout the population. So even if you aren't affected personally by COVID, it's still going to affect you in some way. It's going to come back around to you. And then you also have the economic side where if you have really high infection rates, there might be another lockdown, people will be out of work, job loss. So you have that whole economic side. But then when it comes to the virus, like I said before, when a virus has, ample opportunity to just replicate and spread throughout a population, that's when you're more likely to have variants occurring. So that's always a concern whenever you see situations where you just have rampant spread of the virus, high case numbers, low vaccination numbers. There's always a big concern about the development of variants. So that's something that I would also be worried about if things got out of control. But hopefully we don't get to that point anywhere else again, because we've seen that happen time and time again in different parts of the world. So I'm hoping that people can learn these lessons from other places and not wait for it to happen to them personally before they start acting and trying to do things differently.
Okay. Dr. Thomas, I call you Thomas, I don't know why. Dr. Williams, distracted because people are sending messages like crazy, although I asked for messages to come in before the show so that I can kind of like put it together because I'm producing, I'm hosting, I'm doing everything, right? So I
Yeah.
put like questions together so that you're not constantly probably repeating the same thing, or I'm not fumbling through to figure out which question links up with what, or with each other. So the
Yeah.
questions that are coming in the chat, we're going to try and get to them. But people who sent the questions ahead of time want to make sure that we get to them first, and then we'll get to the questions in the chat. So one of the people, and thank you again, Dr. Williams, for your patience and your commenting how calmly you're explaining and how it's you're keeping it very simple, so
Yeah.
anybody can understand what you're saying, and I think that's what a lot of people will appreciate, is that you're able to break it down for anybody at any level, any class can understand what you're saying. You spoke about people getting herd immunity and all of that, but a question of people with underlying issues, and a few questions came in from people who have underlying issues. Like one person says, I suffer from chronic I think that is psoriasis, and is on methyl, I don't know the name, because I'm not a pharmacy, but it's methotrexate
Yeah, methotrexate.
to help keep it under control. So would like to know, how safe is the vaccine for me?
Yeah, so well, psoriasis is a skin condition. And I know treatment options for psoriasis include immunosuppressants like methotrexate. So generally, yes, the vaccines are safe for people with psoriasis. And it's recommended that you get vaccinated as soon as it's available to you, especially if you're on a immunosuppressant, because you are an immunosuppressant, as the name implies, it suppresses your immune system. So you have an increased likelihood of experiencing severe COVID-19 if you do get infected. So it is recommended that you get vaccinated to protect you from that happening, from the likelihood of that happening.
And same underlying issues. Can a boy of 15 years old take the vaccine if he suffers from bronchitis?
Bronchitis?
Yes.
15, I'm trying to remember. Okay, so Pfizer is approved for 15-year-olds. If you have bronchitis, again, that's another high-risk group where you're more likely to experience severe side effects of COVID-19 if you get infected. So I would recommend you get vaccinated. If there is some type of medication that you're taking, that the child is taking for the bronchitis on an ongoing basis, that might have some kind of contraindication, you can check in with your healthcare provider just to be certain. But generally, I would recommend that you do get it if you have a respiratory condition like bronchitis, because SARS-CoV-2 could do some serious damage.
Okay. Somebody's asking, why are persons with the vaccine still able to contract COVID and are still having serious symptoms as if they were never vaccinated?
So I think I mentioned this previously, but what the vaccine does is provide your body with essentially like a cheat sheet on how to fight off the virus if you do get infected. So there was a study recently showing that people who are vaccinated and people who are unvaccinated have the same viral load if they're infected with COVID-19. That is true in some cases. Okay, let me backtrack. Firstly, if you're vaccinated, your likelihood of getting infected is much lower, first of all. But if you do manage to get infected and you have a breakthrough case, the virus is cleared much more quickly from your system than if you're not vaccinated. So the period of time that you're contagious is much shorter. The virus makes fewer copies of itself in your body, so it's not able to cause very severe disease that will land you in the hospital or cause you to die from the illness. So the incidence of that is much, much reduced if you're vaccinated. Um, just in terms of your immune system, again, the response is kind of split. So you have your antibodies and B cells, and then you have your T cells. So when you're first exposed to the virus, you have these antibodies that are sort of circulating in your body, just looking for any cells that are infected with the virus and getting rid of them right away. But if you, or just look, sorry, the antibodies are looking for the virus itself. So it's looking for that spike protein on the surface of the virus. It will recognize it, destroy the virus, prevent it from infecting your cells. If you do get infected, if your cells do get infected, that's when your T cells come in. These are the cells that kind of remember that version of the cell from when you were vaccinated that had the spike protein on the surface, and it can destroy those cells to prevent you from having severe infection. So the difference is, even if you're vaccinated and you do get infected and you do experience some type of symptoms, you know that your body is equipped to fight it off much more quickly, and you just have a better chance of not getting seriously ill, not experiencing symptoms of long COVID, not dying from the infection. Whereas with a natural infection, if you're unvaccinated, you're kind of on your own. Your body is fending for itself, and you really can't predict how your body will respond to the virus. So I hope that people don't just take it as a surface thing where, well, this person's vaccinated, this person's unvaccinated, and they both had flu-like symptoms when they got COVID-19. It's much deeper than that. If you're unvaccinated, even if those symptoms clear, the virus is still in your system, still circulating. There are a lot of studies on long COVID specifically that are pretty scary, showing long-term damage to different organs. The virus, through the olfactory nerve in your nose, it gets into your brain. So if you have loss of smell and taste from COVID, that virus is traveling all up into your nervous system. So it's not something to take lightly, to think that, well, it's just a cold, it's going to pass. And, that vaccinated person had the flu-like symptoms too. Yes, they had it. But again, the body is equipped to get rid of it quickly and prevent the virus from doing as much damage as it would do to an unvaccinated person. So just try not to think of it just on the surface level. There's a lot more going on with the virus in your body if you're unvaccinated.
I'm glad you brought up the flu aspect, because and I wanted to take the line of questioning somewhat to the testing aspect of it.
Mhm.
Some people have said that I've contracted a cold and the antigen test said I was positive for COVID. I retested a few days later and I was fine. How accurate is antigen testing?
So antigen tests have a lower threshold of sensitivity. So those are actually more prone to false negatives, but they perform best when your viral load is at its highest. So that's people who are symptomatic, or within a certain number of days since your symptoms started, or if you were exposed to somebody who tested positive for COVID and you want just a diagnostic test, if it's just a diagnostic testing situation, antigen tests are good for those. In terms of false positives, though, I think like if you read the tests before or after the specified time in the instruction manual, it could result in a false positive or even a false negative. So antigen tests, they are testing for the proteins associated with the virus. So as I mentioned before, there are 29 proteins associated with SARS-CoV-2, whereas you have more sensitive tests like PCR, which look specifically for genetic material associated with the virus. So I don't know why your antigen test was positive. Like I said, it depends on the timing of the test, the time after which the results were read, like if the person administering the test left the test for too long after carrying it out, or if they read it too early, or in some cases they have cross-contamination with those tests. So there's a bit more. I would say they're not as reliable as PCR tests, which is why, like, if you're traveling and things like that, they always request the PCR test specifically. But antigen tests are good for diagnostic purposes. But I would say if you get like a positive antigen test, I would do a PCR test just to double check.
So are you saying that, if I see my test result, the antigen test result says that I'm positive, directly after I should do a PCR test to confirm that that positive is actually a positive?
Yeah, so if you, again, the antigen tests perform best when you're symptomatic or a short time after you were symptomatic. So if you're symptomatic and you get a positive antigen test, you're likely positive. But if you want to confirm, I think you should go ahead and do the PCR test. I generally prefer PCR tests. I think antigen tests are sort of if you are just self-monitoring and you want to just test occasionally, likely it will be negative. But if you get a positive test, you might want to just double check if you can.
All right, we're going into some of the theories that people have out there, and they have their reasons for thinking what they think, and
Yeah.
we like to do. Somebody's asking, why does the U.S. federal government have a vaccine injury fund in place?
Okay, so the vaccine injury fund, I think this is dating back to the period of time of polio vaccines where it was very difficult to establish if something was caused directly by the vaccine, because just to put it out there, correlation does not mean causation. So just because something happens after you get the vaccine, it doesn't mean that the vaccine caused it. If you take the vaccine and then you're really sleepy, that's a side effect, fatigue or headache, etc. If you get the vaccine and you get into a car accident, it doesn't mean that the vaccine caused the accident. So just to put it out there, correlation doesn't mean causation. But what was happening with the polio vaccine is that people were saying, well, oh, my child got the polio vaccine and then this happened. And they were putting forward these big lawsuits against pharmaceutical companies. And what started happening was that pharmaceutical companies were like, well, we're making this product that's producing massive benefit for the majority of people, but then you have this portion of the population that's bringing forward these lawsuits and saying, well, oh, I took the vaccine and this happened, when there's no good way to really prove that. And so that was sort of discouraging pharmaceutical companies from pursuing vaccines. They were like, well, maybe we can look into other drugs, etc. And so the government became concerned because, as you can see, vaccines are extremely important in terms of keeping the economy running and keeping your population healthy. making sure that your healthcare system is not overrun. And so they put that fund in place so that with vaccines, the blame, if somebody has an issue with a vaccine, they take it up with the government instead of the company specifically, in order to give the companies the peace of mind to be able to carry out the science, do the clinical trials, invest their time and energy into making these highly beneficial products without having the threat of lawsuits, essentially. And so the other thing with this fund is that the essentially the threshold for these cases is something called a presumption of causation. So unlike in a criminal case where the defendant is innocent until proven guilty, the vaccine cases are supposed to presume that the vaccine caused whatever, unless that can be disproved. So you have people being awarded petitions that don't necessarily mean that the vaccine caused the injury, if you understand what I'm saying. So essentially, it was a system where the burden was on the government or the company to prove that this did not cause the damage. So there were these big payouts happening, and so the government kind of stepped in to take that pressure off of the companies so they can just focus on the science and focus on making these products. So it's sort of something that was put in place to ensure the stability of the country's continued supply of vaccines, because there was just dwindling business incentive for these companies to invest in further developing existing vaccines, and developing new ones. So in order to preserve that aspect of the economy and manufacturers' interest in vaccines, that's why the government put that fund in place. Yeah.
Okay.
This is the simplest way I could explain it.
Someone's asking, what are your thoughts on ivermectin? I think it's called ivermectin. It is an Indian
Ivermectin?
ivermectin. That's what it's called, and it's an India's wide usage of this as well as some other countries.
Yeah, so I kind of stick with what the data shows, and I haven't seen any convincing large-scale studies that prove that ivermectin is effective in preventing COVID-19, or reducing the severity of illness. The studies that are published are small sample sizes. They don't really have control groups in the study. It's just like not very well done studies, essentially. And I think that's also the reason why the FDA and other regulatory bodies in the US haven't, given the thumbs up to these treatments. So I'm not a fan of ivermectin. I just haven't seen convincing data on it. There are papers out there. There are people who push ivermectin, but from a scientific perspective, as I said, I look at data and I haven't seen convincing data on it. So I wouldn't really speak on that.
Someone's saying all COVID statistics are confusing. Doctors, nurses, and persons who have experienced COVID are giving conflicting information, and the statistics are skewed. Do we have true statistics to go on?
Sorry, what statistics? You mean like case numbers or what?
I mean, I'm just literally like spitting out the question exactly as it was.
Statistics.
If you're unable to, we can move on to another question because I'm spitting it out exactly as no editing whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you have people telling you things, you should ask them for like what's their source. Oh, can you send me the reference, or can you send me your source? And it should be.
Your mother says, "I love you." Fact check it.
Yeah, it should be something reputable. They shouldn't forward you a news article. They shouldn't be forwarding you a Facebook post that somebody shared. It shouldn't be a YouTube video. It should be something that's published in a reputable journal, something that's peer reviewed, that has gone through, like gone under a microscope and been inspected by people who are experts in that field. So, you can have some level of trust in the information. I think a lot of times we hear things word of mouth from people, like, oh, like an anecdotal story, like, I heard that this happened, or I know somebody who knows somebody who this happened to, or Nicki Minaj, my cousin's friend, those types of stories. And it's like you kind of you can't really take in everything from everybody as 100. Even from me, if you have questions about the things that I'm saying, I can provide you with sources as well. So don't just take things that people say at face value. Follow up with them, ask for sources, not in a attacking way, like send me your sources, just like, oh, so where did you hear that from, or can you direct me to the source of that information? I'd like to read up more on that. Or just kind of probe people. And sometimes when you do that, people get very defensive because they can't provide sources. Well, this person just told me that. Like, you can't just accept things that people say at face value. And like I said before, correlation doesn't mean causation. If somebody has a story about something happening after they got the vaccine, it doesn't necessarily mean that the vaccine caused it. So just keep that in mind as well.
Some questions on health issues. I have an umbilical hernia. Can I take the vaccine?
Umbilical hernia. I believe you can. I think you just can't schedule any surgeries related to that. I think it's within 5 or 10 days. But other than that, yeah, it's fine.
If my blood is thick, can I take the vaccine?
I'm not sure. That's something I'm not sure about.
Somebody's saying there's been experiments done on Black people in the past. What
are my thoughts? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I know that the medical system in the US in particular has done a lot of wrong. Like, people are very skeptical and untrusting, which is warranted and understandable. But I will say that things have changed. Things have improved over the years. It's still not perfect. We still face discrimination in the medical system. But when it comes to the vaccine, I think people need to understand that this is not something that is being put. It may feel like, oh, people are just trying to push this on us, but there are a lot of minorities, Black people, who are involved in research. There are a lot of scientists who have put in years of work on vaccines against, like I said, those other coronaviruses, SARS and MERS, and the current coronaviruses. Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, she's a Black woman. She led the development of the Mrna COVID-19 vaccine. So this is something that Black people are participating in. We are part of the process of bringing this to the population. There are people in there who are looking out for you, advocating for you, even with the clinical trials. I think even though people say that, this vaccine was approved so quickly and it was rushed through the process, they actually paused the start of the clinical trial in order to recruit more Black people, because there was a Black man on the advisory board who was insisting that they recruit more Black people so they could, people trust the vaccine if they know that the people who participate in the clinical trials look like them or share the same, I think, background as they do. So just keep that in mind. Like, things aren't perfect. Nobody's telling you to just have 100% trust in the healthcare system or the medical system or the government or anything. But with this vaccine specifically, you can look at the data, look at the people who are involved. if you have doubts, go to a trusted source and ask your questions. But I don't think the history of the medical system or the healthcare system in the US, I don't think that's something that people should be using as a reason to not get vaccinated, because the point of the vaccine is to protect yourself, protect your family from a disease that's actually disproportionately affecting people of color. So it's kind of counterintuitive for you to not protect yourself because you've been mistreated. But I completely understand the concern that people have, the mistrust and everything. But I would just encourage you to kind of get your questions answered, because your concerns are valid, you know. So it's uh, some people, you know, you have to talk to a few people before you get to a point where you feel comfortable and where you're making the decision of your own free will versus because someone says that you need to do this or somebody else thinks it's a good idea. But I really hope people can get to a point where they feel they understand the importance of it and the value of a vaccine, you know?
Dr. Williams, we've kind of reached the hour mark, and I don't want to take up any more of your time. If you have more time to offer, let me know, and we could go to the chat because we have a few questions, and a few questions came in late through the phone. However, I know we promised an hour, and I know you have a busy schedule, and I really don't want to take any more of your time.
Yeah, I do have to go back to the lab, but I can take a few more questions.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll go for another 10 minutes. Is that okay?
Okay, yeah.
So after 10 minutes, we're done. I'm just going to go through the chat and pull up some of the questions. So one person is asking here, with the mutation of the coronavirus, how effective is the current vaccine?
So I think I mentioned this previously, but the vaccines, yeah, so the vaccines do provide, still provide some protection against the variants. You will likely have, as we're seeing now, you'll have more instances of breakthrough infections where people who are vaccinated are getting infected with the variants, particularly Delta, just because it's 1,000 times the viral load. So you're just being bombarded with way more virus. So some of them are going to get through and get to your cells. But at the end of the day, you still have that memory of the virus in your immune system that can kind of ramp up the response really quickly to get rid of it. That's kind of the key thing about the vaccine. So like I mentioned before, you're not as contagious. You're not contagious for as long of a time. It's going to protect you from severe illness and death. But you may get asymptomatic infection when it comes to the variants, just because the likelihood of a breakthrough infection is higher when it comes to a variant versus the original form of the virus. But again, the vaccine still provides some protection, and some protection is better than no protection.
Okay, Eunice is asking, if you test positive, are you asymptomatic? How long after can you take the next test? So she's saying, but if you are asymptomatic, how long can you take the next test?
So if you're asymptomatic, so there is a possibility of testing too early. So you're saying if you are asymptomatic and you have a positive test, how long after before you take the other tests?
Yeah, I think that's what she's asking.
Okay, I would say 10 to 14 days just to give the virus time to get through your system, to the point where it's no longer like actively replicating. Give your immune system some time to get rid of it. But you can also test sooner if you want to, if it's free. There's no harm in testing earlier.
John Thomas is asking, what about someone who is anemic? Please advise.
Someone who is
anemic.
Oh, I'm anemic. I got the vaccine, but that's anecdotal. But yeah, you can definitely get the vaccine if you're if you're anemic.
Why? Jim Nelson is asking, why is a booster shot required for the Pfizer vaccine?
Yeah, so those vaccines were designed to be given in multiple smaller doses. So you have some vaccines where they give you like a really high dose that can generate a sufficient immune response. You have other vaccines that kind of are like you get the vaccine, and then over time it kind of slowly releases more of the antigen, so you get that ramping up of immune response. But with the mRNA vaccines, what they do is give you a dose, and that is broken down. It disappears from your system pretty quickly. So side note, for people who kind of think that mRNA is something that's going to affect your DNA or hang around in your body for a really long time and cause some long-term effect 2 years down the road. That's not how mRNA works. It's a very fragile molecule. It's, again, something that your body is very familiar with. Like, we have tons of mRNA in our bodies. So it's something that after it does its job, it's broken down by your immune system within 48 to 72 hours. Sorry, what was the original question? I was just going off on a tangent about DNA.
Why is the booster shot required for the Pfizer vaccine?
Right. So yes, you get the initial dose. It mounts that immune response. It sort of primes your immune system. So it's the first time it's seeing that antigen. You produce antibodies. You produce a little army of memory T cells that are kind of on the lookout. The purpose of the booster is to enhance that immune response. So it's sort of like if you and a friend are trying to move like a heavy table across the room. If it's just the two of you, you're able to get it maybe halfway there. But if you add a couple of other friends who jump in to help you, then you will much more easily be able to move it the rest of the way. So the first dose is just the vaccine starting the process of building up protection, and then the second dose provides reinforcement. So it re-exposes your body to that same antigen. So your immune system is like, wait a minute, we saw this before, we're seeing it again. This means it must be something that we need to pay attention to. So you get like a much larger army of immune cells that are able to protect you against future infection. And then you have like the single dose J&J vaccine, as I mentioned before. You have other types of vaccines that give you just like a really high dose that's able to produce a robust immune response. But there also is some data coming out. I think J&J would probably recommend a second dose soon. You would obviously get better immune response with a booster. And there are a lot of different vaccines that require boosters. MMR, hepatitis, shingles, all of those need boosters as well. So it's not something that's uncommon to require a booster.
I think I could probably throw in that question right after is if I've taken AstraZeneca, can I get Pfizer?
Yes, because there are studies that have been done specifically on that combination. So AstraZeneca followed by either Pfizer or Moderna, and they found that you get really good immune responses. I think it's actually better immune responses than if you got both doses AstraZeneca. I know that's something that's not approved everywhere though, so it would depend on what they're doing locally, but there are places like Canada and some other countries that are allowing that particular mix of doses. Yeah.
Somebody's asking, I think that would be the final question. I've been having breathing problems from last year. Is it safe for me to take the vaccine?
Breathing problems. So if I had breathing problems and there was a virus that's causing respiratory issues in particular, I would want to get vaccinated, because if I did get COVID-19, I know that it would like severely affect me in particular, because I already have this underlying issue. The other factor there is if the person is taking any type of medication that might have some contraindication, that's something that you would want to check with your doctor. But if it's just breathing problems, you would want to protect yourself. So that's also why for people who have asthma, for example, they recommend that they're in the priority group to get vaccinated, because if they get infected, it could have a much more serious outcome than somebody who doesn't have that respiratory issue.
And is it completely safe for children? The last one for me.
Children, so Pfizer is the only vaccine, I believe, that's approved. Actually, I think Sinopharm also in some places, but approved for children up to the age of 12. And they're currently in clinical trials. Well, they just completed their clinical trials for children aged 5 to 11. They had 2,200 kids. They just submitted the data to the FDA. It would probably take maybe a month for them to review. But yes, I don't have any kids, but if I was a parent, especially if my child is going back out to school and that type of thing, interacting with people, I would want them to be vaccinated, because again, you can't predict how somebody's body will respond to the virus. Being young and healthy has nothing to do with it. We've seen so many cases of young and healthy people having really severe outcomes, long COVID, that is now being classified as a disability, and people dying from COVID, people going brain dead. I've seen a couple of college students brain dead because of a COVID-19 infection. So anything that you can do to prevent that from happening, to give your body a head start in protecting against this virus, I would opt for it, as long as, the person is healthy, they're not on any medication that has any contraindication, but that's something that you would check with your doctor if you have that specific case. But for a healthy child, yeah, I would say go for it.
Dr. Williams, it was a pleasure having you on. I truly appreciate you taking the time out. For those of you who, Dr. Williams uses her social media quite effectively to promote or to speak about vaccines and different theories that people may have, even the conspiracy theories that people may have about vaccines. You're on TikTok as well as Instagram, right?
Yeah. I think I'm most active on TikTok, but I'm also on Instagram. And people DM me all the time with questions, so feel free to do that as well. And I'll try to get back to you as soon as I have some time, because sometimes I get really busy.
When I put you were coming on, a lot of doctors, when I put you were coming on, a lot of doctors that follow me from all different parts of the world, they're like, "Oh, we follow her." I was like, "Really?" Okay, I get a celebrity.
That's funny.
It's your delivery. I think a lot of times scientists, no offense, Jarrell, scientists may appear to be like know too much, and then they kind of like almost like you feel like you're being bombarded with information, too much information that you can't really break down into pieces. And
yeah,
to meet people who can break it down into small little fine particles that we can all take in and understand. So thank you very much for coming on and sharing with us and speaking and answering all of these questions that people had. There are more questions coming in through the WhatsApp. Unfortunately, didn't get a chance to ask them. I do recommend that you follow her on TikTok. So you're at what's your handle so people can
on TikTok it's Dr. Asher Williams. And there's a link there for like my other social media. So if you get on my TikTok, you can find it.
All right, so I just added it on here, and you guys, it's right here, so you can check her out at Dr. _Asher Williams on TikTok, and she gives all this information out. Absolutely FREE. One of the things Jarrell has been schooling me on the vaccines. Let me tell you, because I mean, I've fought back and forth with her about.
Trust me, I've had those discussions with my family. I think so. Just going off on the tangent, but like I do a lot of just public education about vaccines, but I made sure I sat down with my family members, answered all their questions, got through all their concerns so that they could get vaccinated, because I know how important vaccination is, and I don't want some person in my family to not get the vaccine because they heard some piece of misinformation or they thought that this would happen if they got the vaccine, and then the virus gets to them and they have some serious reaction or they die from the virus. So yeah, I feel like I have a personal responsibility to the general public just as a scientist who works in vaccine development. But yeah, I've had those conversations with family as well, the back and
She
forth.
said
And
she wanted to fight, like she was gonna literally fight me. Like I was just sitting there, and when it was done, and she said to me, one of the things she said to me, which she reiterates in the chat, she's like, "And if you go looking for conspiracy theories, you will
oh
get."
yeah,
That's
they're a dime a dozen. There's a dime. I'm currently going back and forth with one of my Jamaican aunties. I think I've gotten to everybody except one of my aunties in Jamaica, but we're getting there.
I honestly like I like knowing somebody who is in it, because it's just like, when you don't know somebody in it and somebody tells you something, and even some of the people who are out there telling you to get vaccinated
Yeah.
are not even vaccinated. They're just doing their jobs.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
A lot of doctors who are not vaccinated. So I'm saying to myself, okay, if you're not getting vaccinated, why should I trust you? And knowing that you are in it, and my sister as well, well, not necessarily directly in it as it relates to vaccines, but in terms of the study of proteins, and she's like, girl, nothing gonna happen to you. Take the vaccine.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm happy to answer people's questions and break it down for them. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time. And thanks again to all those of you who tuned in. Dr. Asha, I know you got to get back to the lab, and have a
Yeah.
great and thank you for sharing such gems with us here this evening.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. Guys, that was it. Thank you very much to all those of you who tuned in this evening. I am happy that we could provide you with a lot of answers to some of your questions. I hope we got to or through to most of your questions. And I hope that it sets your feel better about whatever decision you decide to make, based on the responses. As I've always said, I will probably never be one to shout on a bandwagon, go get vaccinated. I feel like everybody needs to do it, make the decision for themselves based on their own issues as well as their family. It's a personal choice that you make, and I respect everybody's personal choice. I still feel that is that is where my headspace is at. It will still be your choice. However, the doctor gave you the gems, and you can decide what to do with the information at the end of it. I really appreciate my sister Jael for putting me in touch with Dr. Asha Williams. Jael is a gem, and Jael explained it to me really well. I would have loved to have her on as well to speak to y'all, because she has a way. I think it's the teacher from her former years. Being a teacher, she's able to break it down, until she was getting angry. She's getting angry with me. She said it's a public choice. It's a pandemic and it's contagious. So she's still here, going off at me that it's not a personal choice. She says it's a Gerald says it's a public choice. It's a pandemic. It's contagious. Get on with it. I see my family, all of them telling me what what I need to do. Thanks, guys, to all those of you who tuned in right here on Jael Joseph Live. I truly appreciate you and your support. Hope you shared the link with someone, so that they can also be better informed. Until next time, have a good night. Bye-bye.